Good morning. I apologize. I'm about 45 minutes late. It's Dr. Alicia Main. First YouTube live that I'm doing. So kind of screwed up on the time. But wanted to give this a test run and kind of talk about fascia tissue in animals and what I've been researching over the past 25 years, what I've been remembering. I don't want to say I've discovered anything because the truth is that all of this science has already been here. The ancients have always told us and shared with us the ancient wisdom of how our bodies work and how simple and natural healing can be. So I don't claim to have discovered anything, like Columbus didn't really discover America. You know what I mean? So I'm just sharing what I am remembering from and with the animals that really backs up the natural science that has always been. So let's talk a little bit about I'll just talk a little bit about my background so that you know who I am and what my work is about and how and why I followed the breadcrumbs, so to speak, of everything that I had been shown and led sequentially to begin studying about animals and healing and really how friggin' incredible we are, how incredible our bodies are, how incredible our animals are, how incredible nature is, and how much non-truth we've been told about ourselves and how much disconnection we've experienced. So I started out, grew up in upstate New York, moved to the Bronx at about 9 years old. At about 5 years old, my mom asked me what I wanted to do with my life. And I said I wanted to be a vet because I want to help animals heal. And so went through school. Math and science did not very much get along. So I kind of shelved that and decided I would go into fitness training in my college years, and then graduated with a degree in business, and then completed a fitness training curriculum that would allow me to become a certified fitness trainer. And I went into the fitness industry for about a decade, and I loved it. Absolutely loved it. I loved helping people get healthy. I love learning about the body. I started understanding math and science from such a different perspective because I actually had, humans in front of me, and I started understanding how the math and science worked. And during that time, I met a wonderful client who shared with me the gift of acupuncture one Christmas. And she kind of turned me on to alternative care like chiropractic care and macrobiotic cooking, and also acupuncture and eventually Qigong. And that path led me to studying Wu Ming Qigong and understanding traditional Chinese medicine, the five element theory, which really, 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 every single time I took class, every single time I practiced, it became my devotion. Not as a weird religious, thing, but as a daily life understanding of how our bodies actually work and how energy works and that everything is connected. And that journey led me to starting to study animal communication and all different kinds of other modalities like homeopathic remedies and flower essences and long distance healing. And along my way, I became an animal communicator. So instead of working with humans, I started working with the animals. Became a holistic dog trainer because I started putting together so many pieces of the picture, not just about behavior, but how does body alignment affect behavior? How do emotions affect animals, which affect their behavior? How does an animal take on energy from their humans? I had dealt with a lot of animals that had cancer, and quite honestly, some of their people had cancer, or they ended up avoiding having cancer, but the animals took it on. So it's been an amazing journey. I've swam with dolphins in the open ocean and communicated with them and connected with them and received much, much, much information from them. I've worked with wild animals. I've worked with wild horses and bison and coyotes and foxes and elk and deer. I've worked with domesticated animals, with domesticated horses and dogs and cats, and have trained thousands of animals. I invented a harness and leash training product called Walk and Sync, which I stopped manufacturing in 2021. But all of these journeys with the animals, and then I also visited different sacred sites. I visited the crop circles in England and just spent a lot of time understanding the energetics. So what's underlying what happens in our physical system. And through that journey, I was training a dog in Aspen, Colorado one day. He's a really cool healer mix. And his parents called me in because he was all of a sudden aggressive. They were like, they said he's the greatest dog, but we don't know what's going on. We take him for walks and he's barking at everybody. And I asked them if I could take the dog for a walk by myself. And we started walking down the trail, and he started barking at people. And I had a long standing, I'd probably have been animal communicating for about 5 years at that point. And when we were walking, I said, "What's going on?" He said, "I don't have a behavior issue." I said, "Clearly, my friend, you kind of do have a behavior issue." And he said, "No, I have a body issue." And many years before, my golden retriever, Tucson, he loved the Frisbee. So he's playing Frisbee. His back legs did not catch him. And he landed on his tailbone. And he was within about 4 or 5 hours, he couldn't walk. So I brought him for chiropractic care. I brought him for acupuncture. And when we were sitting on the kitchen floor together, he said to me, "Why don't you do the hands-on thing that your friend does with you on your own back?" And at that time, I had been receiving Qigong meridian therapy sessions, it's a Qigong medical treatment where you push on different points in the body, release energy flows, and the whole system starts behaving differently because your energy is moving differently. So I started to do that with Tucson, and literally within 3 days, he was up and walking. And I don't know how this dog, probably 8 years later, 9 years later, 10 years later, knew about Tucson. But as I was walking this healer, he said, "Remember the thing that you did with your golden retriever. Do that to my back." I was like, okay, because I'm just living my life. I'm communicating with animals. I'm listening to what they have to say. And I'm just learning, remembering. So I did what he reminded me to do on his back. And I got to one point on his back, and he just kind of turned and looked at me. And I was like, "Sorry." And then we released what was stuck. And then when we were walking back home, no reactivity. So got to his parents, and I said, they said, "Well, what happened? What happened? What happened?" And I said, "Well, your dog doesn't really have a behavior issue the way you think he has a behavior issue. He actually has a body issue." And they said, "What do you mean?" And I said, "Well, as we were walking, I just kind of noticed his back looked a little bit stiff. And so I touched it, and they kind of both went like white, like a white sheet. And they said, "You touched his back." And I said, "Yeah, I mean, it's, I just loosened it." And I said, "Why?" And they said, "Well, we never touch his back because that sets him off." And I'm thinking, well, it's probably a good thing to tell the trainer. You know what I'm saying? So they said, well, what happened? I said, well, when I released it, he turned around and looked at me like, that's it. And then we continued walking and we walked back home and he didn't have any reactivity. And that's when it started hitting me. He was right. He had a body issue. And in 25 years of working with thousands of animals in person and around the world, I have really come to see as a behaviorist that so many of the issues that our animals are facing, whether they are behavior related or whether they're health related, completely have to do with tight fascia tissue in the body. Now, when I first started this journey with that particular dog, I thought it was just the muscles, loosen up the muscles in the body. The animal relaxes, they take a deep breath, and then it's a lot easier for them to behave properly or to physically feel better. As I continued working with animals, and I probably tested in the neighborhood of 900 to 1,000 dogs on body and off body at this point. One of the things that I didn't fully understand as a fitness trainer, and I also didn't understand as a dog trainer, is this layer of tissue, connective tissue, that literally sits right underneath our skin and our animals. So fascia tissue is pretty much made of the same materials in humans as it is in animals. And as I continued on this path, as I kept assessing dogs' backs, which is what I was shown by the dogs to start with, it was fascinating that, I would get to the people's house for dog training. They would tell me everything that was wrong about the dog. And while they were talking with me, I was just accessing points on the animal's back, which was what I thought was releasing the muscles. I didn't realize at the time I was releasing the fascia tissue. And, usually the dog at some point would stretch out, they would take a big yawn. And then I would say, okay, I heard what's going on. Let's go outside and let's just, let's just see what your dog does. And they would look at me and go, what did you do to my dog? And I said, what do you mean? What I do to your dog? And they'd say, well, when I walk them, and if we're at this point at the park, or they see this, or they see that, they're going ballistic. And I, because I was remembering and not reading this out of a book and not learning this from another trainer 20 plus years ago, the animals were literally showing me what was taking place with them. So I found it really, really interesting. I said, isn't that interesting? When I work with their bodies first, before I label them with anything, before we go anywhere, all of a sudden, these behaviors are just going away like magic. So I continued to do that. I continued to understand that every single animal that I worked with, I was always going to check their back. And it was working amazing. And then I kind of learned how to also, from the animals directly, how to run energy through the belly line. And that was really incredible too, because I was like, wow, there's muscles there, but not really. And so the animals started leading me in this direction to start studying and learning about fascia tissue. What fascia tissue is, as I explained, it just sits right under the skin. It's connective tissue, okay, meaning it is completely connected. Like what you feel in your skin, your fascia tissue has a connective quality to it. And here's the thing, the fascia tissue, and this is fascinating, it's everywhere, all inside your body. There's superficial fascia tissue that's right under your skin. There's deeper layers of fascia. Fascia covers the entire brain. It covers everywhere inside the body. It covers the bones, it covers the joints, it covers muscle, it covers everything. And fascia tissue outside of the brain, that's what feels. There's over 250 million neuroreceptors contained in the fascia tissue. That's what actually feels. Like if you cut your finger, you don't get a headache. You cut your finger, and then it signals to the brain, okay, we got cut. The brain is not a sensory organ. It is a processor. And so it can organize lots of different information that's running through it, but you don't feel from your brain. You actually feel from your fascia tissue, which is connected to your gut brain. And your gut brain and your enteric system is the feeling brain. This is the thinking brain. So this deals with logic and reason, but it does not deal with feeling. So as I started learning more and more about this, and as I started listening to what the dogs were telling me about how to work with their bodies, and by the time I got to the belly line, they were explaining to me that there is this connective tissue and it runs the whole body. And when it gets compressed, it actually blocks the flow of energy in the body. So it can slow down blood flow. When I was studying Qigong, which I still study and practice, Qigong allowed me to do these very simple exercises that started to have a very, very profound effect on how I related to my sensitivities and how I could feel things. So when I was working with the animals, I wasn't reading a book. I didn't have an instructor telling me and teaching me things. I did take some courses. I did take massage. I did take equine touch. I did study Qigong. I was using Reiki. I don't use Reiki anymore, but I was studying it. And so what was happening was not just like this book explanation of what is fascia tissue. It was literally this dynamic interaction of being able to speak with it, being able to feel what the animals feel. And as my training with the animals kept going on, they started teaching me more and more things. So I've been working with the dogs and the cats for about, I would say like 5 or 6 years. And then the horses started teaching me. And then the horses added in a whole element that was, so we had the dogs and the cats, the back line and the belly line, and then the horses, we did the face line. Now, here's what's a little bit different about how I understand fascia tissue than most of the research that's out there, be it human or animal. When I work, I'm not working on the body. I'm literally working off body. So I can work with animals thousands of miles away. Because as I was working with them and they started encouraging me when I would get phone calls from clients that had, animals that were injured. One particular case was a client of mine in New York whose giant poodle had suffered a collapse on a New York City street. So he's about 8 years old. He was walking and then he just collapsed. And after 3 vet visits, one with a neurologist, it was determined that he had degenerative myelopathy. And according to Western medicine, degenerative myelopathy, you can't really heal it. Like the best you can do is make the animal comfortable. But in a communication with him, when I was in Colorado and he was in New York, so we were 2,500 miles away, never, ever met the dog in person. But he said to me, "You're going to help me. You can help me heal. You can fix my back." He said, "It's not degenerative myelopathy." He said, "I'm a giant poodle. I love to run. I love to play." He was in Central Park a lot. He played and he was so active and so healthy. And what was told to my client was that he had this neurological disease. What he told me was, no, because I'm so big and active, I've got a lot of things out of whack in my back. And so I've just got a compression on my nerve. And as soon as we can start to open that up and release that, he said, I'm going to be fine. I'm going to run. I'm going to walk. I'm going to run. I'm going to jump. And my client was, she had spoken to other animal communicators before, but she was kind of holding with bated breath. So after we did our first long distance session, he was able to walk. Now, I never physically touched him. So how I work with fascia tissue over long distances is understanding that it's got these energetic properties that are connected through a unified energy field, which is all of my teaching and trainings that I learned from Qigong. And I just had enough, I don't know if I want to say confidence, but I was willing to try it. And so we did our second session, and Brio actually started running. And it was amazing because he was given a life sentence. We're sorry, we know he's only 8 years old, but he's not going to do well. And then we did our third session, and Brio was in the park and he was jumping. Now, Western medicine, 3 doctors, 1 a neurologist, a neurological vet, said, we're sorry, we can't, we don't know what to tell you. We could keep him comfortable, but we don't know how long he's got, and we don't know how fast that this will degenerate. I know very little about fascia tissue, but I'm told by the animals, here's how you're going to work on us. Here's the points you're going to touch. Here's what you're going to release. And it doesn't matter that you're thousands of miles away. So Brio was a shining example of, wow, we are not just these 3D beings, right? It doesn't, you don't even have to physically touch another being's fascia. You don't have to physically touch another being's fascia tissue. You can touch them thousands of miles away because we are connected in a unified energy field. And what do you say except for the results, right? The results were this dog that could not walk and that was given this medical diagnosis now could walk, now could run, now could jump. And he went on to live another, I think, 5 or 6 years in really, really good health. And, had my client listened to the prognosis that she was given, he never would have walked. And she later chronicled all of this, all my work with her. And I was with her on the phone when Brio was leaving. So we were communicating with him when he was finally ready to leave the planet. But this is the fascinating information about fascia tissue, because most fascia tissue research is conducted via cadavers, dead animals, right? Dead people. And the scientists are trying to put together the pieces of the puzzle, of how it works at that really, really reductionistic cellular level. But how I research fascia tissue is with live animals, long distances, and with people actually watching. I do have a TV show on Tuesdays that I record live. It's a membership subscription, but you get to join in and enter this healing field of what fascia tissue really does. So fascia tissue is what feels, okay? And what it also does, very, very important. I know we always talk about having to have blood, right, in our body, very important. But what is even more important is you have to have your chi flowing in your body, because chi is what actually animates everything. It's what animates the water. It's what animates plasma. It's what animates blood. It's the intelligence. Chi is quantum intelligence. So that intelligence is what gets carried through the water in our body. It's what gets carried through our blood. It's what gets carried through our brain. It's what gets carried through our nervous system and every single cell in our body. And if that flow in your body or your animal's body is affected because there was some kind of trauma, maybe your animal banged into something, maybe they jumped out of the car wrong, maybe they missed jumping on the bed, and they kind of like bounced off. Think about puppies and horses and cats as they grow, right? They're these flexible little kittens, and or puppies or foals, and they're running around, they're doing all kinds of stuff, and they fall over, they bang into shit. You know what I mean? It happens. For us, it's, we start from crawling. I mean, why are we so soft when we're young and pliable? Because our fascia tissue is relaxed. What starts to happen is we walk and we run and we play sports and climb on trees and do all kinds of crazy shit. Our fascia tissue gets dented. So just like a car gets a dent in it, and you would go to, the body shop to get the dent pulled out. With fascia tissue, because it covers the entire inside of the animal's body and our body, if it gets dented, yes, we will heal. But you also have to pull the compression back out and release the fascia tissue. Or over time, that one little block, maybe, that your animal had in their paw, over time, and it's tricky with fascia tissue because you can't really see the dents. You got to feel them. But over time, if we don't release that, then that energy will start to coagulate in an area that could create all kinds of things. It could create allergies, it could create arthritis, it could create cancer, because cancer doesn't really come from outside of us unless it gets injected in us. Cancer starts because energy is coagulating in a certain way in the body because of some type of former trauma or some type of former compression. So as I continued working with the animals, and the horses stepped in, and then they showed me how to run and release the fascia tissue in their faces, which was absolutely fascinating because, when you looked at the horse's face, you're like, okay, they're fine. And then you start to see these little asymmetries, and then you start working with the fascia tissue. It's almost like cotton candy. That's what it feels like to me when I work with it and when I teach my students how to work with it. So starting to release that tension in their fascia tissue, it was amazing because, one, I didn't even know that fascia tissue, if it's compressed in different areas, you can still function. You just won't feel like you're functioning at your optimal. But if I'm working on a horse that, several thousand miles away, I've worked on horses in New Zealand, 9,000 miles away. And you literally can see as the fascia tissue releases, the tissue that's under the skin, that's like kind of like your collagen, right? You could see faces change. It doesn't even look like the same horse from the beginning to end. And when I work on the whole body, it doesn't even look like the same animal. So fascia tissue, when it's compressed, can also affect our hydration. Okay, I've noticed so many horses when I'm working on their bodies, they'll go and drink, or they'll go and get more minerals because now all of a sudden they feel like they want to drink more, and going to like a salt block or a mineral block helps the horses uptake even more water. And it is, I mean, I call it fascinating, and I find it really, really exciting because I don't come to this going, oh, I know, I studied all this stuff and I have all these answers. I come to this going, hey, all I know is that this is something that the ancients have always known. They have always known about this tissue, and also how to work with it at a very cellular level. So if I'm working with a horse 9,000 miles away, and I do this on Zoom on my Animal Healer TV on show on Tuesdays, because I want people to see what happens, what's possible in terms of healing for our animals, but also for ourselves in like a 1 hour time period where the animal doesn't even look the same. They look so much more relaxed. Their coat looks shiny. Their eyes look bright. They move better. Their person actually feels more relaxed and more open. Or sometimes I'll release something in an animal's shoulder and the human goes, oh my God, my shoulder just released. And the reason is because fascia tissue, it's what quantumly entangles everything. It allows us to be inside our bodies, feel our bodies. Like, I get it. We have lots and lots of science that tells us lots and lots of reductionistic things. But the reality is, when you do things at a cellular level, at an energy level, you start to realize you don't have to separate things out into all these parts, all these pieces, all these things that have to make sense. If you work with the tissue, it's quantumly entangled with the entire body. So when I started working with fascia tissue and being able to remember, I think remember is the best word, not discover. Wow. Being able to feel through my own hands a being that is 2 feet away, 20 miles away, or 9,000 miles away, that we are quantumly entangled. Our cells are entangled in a unified energy field that all life, not just some, all life experiences. And so working with these animals, after they've been seen by the vet, after they've had different kinds of diagnoses, and after, nothing's coming back on the blood work, and after nothing is showing up that the doctors can actually trace, because it's not necessarily a physically embedded issue. It's an energy issue. Because when the fascia tissue gets compressed, it starts to slow down the functioning and the flow of energy in the body. So one of the things that I guess has become part of my mission as the animal healer is to help animal parents, who are, humans first and foremost themselves, but have animals, help them understand this really complicated science, right? Of quantum entanglements and physics and all of these, highly populated areas of information, how to help them make it so simple by utilizing the awareness and understanding of the ancient wisdom and just bringing it here, bringing it forth very, very simply with how do we help our own animals heal? How do we help ourselves heal? And more than anything, while I didn't do well in science and math, one of the principles that I do remember is that, like, nothing can be created nor destroyed. Everything that's been has always been, it's always been here. It just changes forms. So if an animal has an issue and they banged into something, they compressed their fascia tissue, they landed the wrong way, like Tucson did years ago. Well, if we can start relaxing that tissue from going into a not, it's going to have trauma, but if we can get to it soon enough, or even if we get to it years later, because I'm seeing animals that, injured themselves at like 2 years old and now they're 10 and we're still able to release the fascia tissue. It's mind-boggling how much better the system can completely function. Like they move better, they feel better. Like I said, they get brighter coats, they get brighter eyes. They take deeper breaths. And so when we understand the properties and the qualities of fascia tissue, not just in the 3-dimensional reality, but in the 5-dimensional reality of energy, there are so many things that we can do literally with our own 2 hands in such a simple way to help our animals' behavior. I've worked with hundreds and hundreds of behavior cases. Nobody could resolve it. And I said, did anybody ever check the body? And I go, why would we check the body? And I'm like, well, the body actually dictates how the brain works. The brain doesn't dictate how the body works at the base level. Okay. So when we understand this, when we understand how fascia tissue is such an important component and plays such an essential role in our behavior and our health. I have had animals that lit berserk, like couldn't handle like touch, couldn't handle anything. So obviously working off body, it keeps me safer and it keeps them safer. But when we don't understand that fascia tissue compression can affect energy flow, which affects behavior, then we sit there and we try to change the animal's mind. But if the animal could change their mind, they would. They don't want to be stuck in that. But conditioning them to change their mind versus releasing tight fascia tissue, which is more likely at the root of what created the behavior, because energy stopped flowing in a certain way. And then they were like just more anxious, more, could be more aggressive. I also have animals just suffer terrible anxiety, thunderstorms, being left alone, things like. Soon as we work the body and relax the fascia tissue, it's literally often like night and day, whether it's a health issue, whether it's a behavior issue. So I just kind of wanted to share this as like an intro. Haven't really done many YouTube lives, so I thought this would be a really, really great way to share with you animal parents who are also humans yourself. So how your animals can experience issues in their fascia tissue, like the issues. I will have to say, after 25 years of studying and working with animals, 30 years of communicating with them, the issue is in the tissues. Because whether it's a health issue, which I won't even name because obviously American Medical Association and the American Veterinary Association don't really like that. But whether it's a health issue, and I'm not saying do not take your animal to the vet. Always take your animal to the vet if you got an emergency. But if you've taken your animal to the vet and we don't know what's wrong, can't tell from the blood work, we've taken a sonogram, we've taken it, we don't know. You want to look at the fascia tissue. If you've got an animal with a behavior problem, you want to look at the fascia tissue, because as soon as that fascia tissue gets relaxed, the entire brain shifts. It's not the reverse. The brain doesn't shift first. And if you shift the brain first, but you have not checked with what's going on in the fascia tissue and making sure that that animal does not have unrecognized tension or pain, the problem is you can get them to switch their brain, but that's like someone who's in pain and takes a painkiller. The pain is giving you a signal, like something's not right, we have to address it. And because in our Western world, we often focus on the physical, not necessarily the energy that runs the physical, you could take a painkiller and be doing disservice to your body or to your animal's body. Instead, when you work with the fascia tissue and you release it, and I teach this and I can share with you how to do this, and you can come and watch my Animal Healer TV show, you really start to get to see how simple, how natural, and how unbelievably effective fascia tissue release really is. It works. I've got hundreds and hundreds of testimonials about this work, and I'm really realizing, like, wow, this is actually where medicine is headed. We don't need a lot of big, fancy, complicated words. Most often, we don't need a lot of drugs or supplements whatsoever to help your animals heal and transform their behavior and health issues. So, if you'd like more information, click on or go to aliciamaine.com, ALLECIA, Maine, MAINE.com. And if you would like to find out information about my Animal Healer TV show and the live episodes we do on Tuesdays, I will leave a link in the description for you. I hope this was informative. I'm happy to answer any of your questions, so please feel free to put those in the comments. And my apologies for not being on time today, but hopefully this will go out. And if this makes sense to you, and if you have more questions, please don't hesitate to connect with me. And please feel free, if I can help you, or if I can support you and your animals, reach out. I work with humans and I work with animals. And yeah, it's just some of the most fascinating work I've ever encountered. And I've done a lot of body work. I've experienced myself a lot of different modalities, but the modality that I work with is the in-sync body assessment and fascia release technique. And my PhD research, which the animals kept leading me to, was with 27 formerly wild Mustangs who were at all different locations, and it was via Zoom. And I did the in-sync body assessment and fascia tissue release for 27 of them, and every single one of them had behavior and health shifts almost instantaneously. And it just really helped showcase, like, again, I didn't discover this. I just remembered it. And as I remember it, I'm sharing it with you to be able to help support your animals as well. So I hope you have a beautiful afternoon. Thanks for bearing with me for my first YouTube live. You can also visit the Animal Healer on YouTube, and I've got a lot of videos showcasing my long distance fascia tissue release work. So have a great day. Sending so much love and so many blessings to you and your animals.